various Pathfinder groups ran it different ways. So I've heard everything from the ones that I was around, because my dad was a Pathfinder leader at one point when I was too tiny to join. And those were mostly just like camping and learning some survival skills type of thing. But other Pathfinder groups, a lot of them literally will drop kids out with no food, no water, build a shelter. You're going to be persecuted, learn to live out here by yourselves. They have them eat bugs. They force them to eat bugs. They just all kinds of crazy stuff. And then, yeah, and then you have these drills, which ours happened at school, but Pathfinders did it. A lot of Adventist boarding schools do it, where some of them don't even tell you that it's a drill. They act like it's real and they terrorize kids. Thank God our principal was a little wiser than that. But where it's like basically SWAT teams storm in and drag you out at gunpoint, and they force you on your knees and they make you swear that you're going to worship on Sunday. And everybody has to go through this whole thing of how will they die for their faith. And like I said, some of them do that and don't tell the kids that it's fake. And these kids are literally shitting themselves. And so there's a broad spectrum of that. And I've heard that it's gotten less. I think that kind of was a big thing in the 80s, maybe more than, but certainly kids I know that went to Adventist boarding schools, even into the 2000s, were being subjected to it for sure.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and our guest for today's episode is a former fundamentalist and a former Seventh-day Adventist. She's currently getting ready to have her book come out, her memoir titled Holy Disobedience. Please welcome to the podcast today's guest, Melissa Duge Spiers. Melissa, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well. Thank you. Looking forward to this.
Well, I'm very grateful for you to be here. For each guest, of course, I'm always grateful because there are just so many stories. Sadly, there's a lot of trauma and a lot of different things, but we try to focus on the healing and the growth. And I see you on Instagram, and I was just so attracted over the years because you also give a lot of like education in many of your bits. So I was even a little bit nervous asking, hey, can you be on my podcast? But I'm glad I did.
I'm glad you did.
Okay, so to get started, I already mentioned that you are a former fundamentalist, former Seventh-day Adventist. For me, when I first saw that, I thought that they were two different things. And to be honest, you are the first former Seventh-day Adventist that I have spoken to. Can you clarify what are the differences, or is it the same thing?
It is, well, so Seventh-day Adventists are basically a fundamentalist Christian organization. They claim that they are the only flavor of Christianity, right? Everybody does that. But they do follow, they claim that they are the only Christian sect that follows every word of the Bible correctly. Of course, they all say that too, but Seventh-day Adventists take it as far as, to follow the seventh day, to keep it holy, the 10 Commandments. They worship on Saturday. That is thus their seventh day part. And so they claim that sets them apart and blah, blah, blah. So they're the true fundamentalists, right? But really, like you and I were talking about a little bit before we started, they are, once you wring the towel out, get down to the dirty water that comes out at the end, they are really a end times cult is what they are. They're just huge at this point. They're bigger than the Mormons. They're bigger than the SBC. Nobody knows that, but they're like 27 million members worldwide. And they resist the term cult just like violently, but they are an end times cult.
Wow, so that is a lot to unload because I only have heard of Seventh-day Adventists, but hearing the numbers, 27 million. It's like, where did y'all come from? Like, I haven't even known. It's been very
Right.
quiet.
That is, and you said I'm the first one that you've had on, and that is generally my experience. There are not too many ex-Adventists speaking out. Um, and there's a very small it started in the United States. It was started by their prophet Ellen White, and we can talk about her later. She was a real prize, but she came out of the same movement that the LDS and the JWs came out of, the Millerites in the mid 1800s. So it was an American religion originally. Now I think they have less than their American numbers have been falling for a long time, and in Europe as well. Western cultures have been rejecting it big time, but they are aggressive missionaries and colonizers, basically religious colonizers. And so I think they have less than 1 million people in the United States at this point, but their overseas populations, Central and South America, Asia, and Africa, I think their biggest portion now of people per continent, or whatever Adventists per continent is in Africa. And so they are worldwide. And so that's where the 27 million comes from, is a lot of really strong arm missionary tactics.
Okay, and were you born into this, or did they recruit you? What's the story behind that?
I am a fourth generation on both sides of my family. My great grandmother on my dad's side was missionaryized, just like they do now with everyone. They target very desperate people in desperate situations, either a culture or just a single person or whatever. And they go sweeping in with, they have the fourth largest healthcare system in the world and the fourth or fifth largest education system in the world. And so they sweep in with like healthcare and education, and they build schools and hospitals, and they teach English, and they blah, blah, blah. And, and then they're just guaranteed good church members, because why wouldn't you if you were needing, so that was my great grandmother. She was a very poor, rural, Southern woman whose husband had died, and she had 5 children to raise. And so the Adventists took her in and gave her a job, and they educated her children, and it was a good bargain on their part, because 4 generations later, the entire family is still Adventist.
So are you the only one who's an ex from that part of the family, from both parts of the family?
Um, no, I have a sister. She is also very anti Adventist. And then we have random family members, like one of my uncles and a couple cousins, and they're like little people in the family tree all over that have been like, fuck this. But but in general, I would say probably at least 75% of my family and extended family on both sides is still Seventh-day Adventist.
What was life like growing up as a Seventh-day Adventist? I mean,
Oh.
like inside the home, and maybe later we can talk about outside. But for now, what was life like as a family super into the Seventh-day Adventist cult?
Yeah, it is. It's funny because when I say they're a cult, of course, their first thing is like, we don't live in compounds. And it's like, yeah, you don't live in compounds, but every Adventist family kind of functions as the compound. And then we all went to Adventist schools all our lives. And so we were just, kept in this little bubble. So I did not have any encounters with people who were not Adventist, really, until I was late high school. We did do a couple things, like we did have neighbors that weren't, but we weren't allowed to play with any of the children or anything. And we did gymnastics for a while. Those people were not Adventists, but then we were taken out of that very quickly. And so Adventists, the traditional conservative Adventists are vegetarian, and this all comes from their prophet. Vegetarian, she banned basically novels, magazines, anything that wasn't religious reading material. No bowling, no movies. Of course, we had no television. We couldn't listen to anything with a rock beat. A drum beat was from the devil. And it would somehow the devil would get in your body with the rhythm. Um, and so it was a very unchildlike childhood, I guess. We had family worship every day. You went from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday is God's day, 24 hours, and you do nothing but worship. You can't go running, you can't swim, you can't play games, you can't do anything. You have to go to church and worship God, basically. The best you could do as a kid was go on a nature walk because then you were appreciating God's creation. Um, and then we would have an hour of religion every day in Adventist school. We would also start school with chapel. And and when I say an hour of religion every day in school, it wasn't religion, of course. It was Seventh-day Adventist doctrine, right? We weren't studying Buddhism or even Catholics. And then we every day then ended with family worship where we had to read the Bible and read the prophets' books and all of that. So it was a lot of theological, spiritual force feeding, and there was extreme purity culture, of course, and especially for girls, we really weren't. We were Adventists believe a lot in education, so they don't not educate their women like a lot of the same cults that came out of that time. But we weren't really expected to do anything with our education. Like going out and becoming a career person really wasn't considered a cool thing for girls.
Mhm. So as a young woman, like what were you like let's say you stayed inside,
Mhm.
you're full mentally, and let's just say
Right.
obviously you're not. But if you were, what would your life be like now if you grew up like that? And I mean, education is I mean, yeah, what would life look like now probably?
You know, it is interesting because I left at 18. I left as soon as I graduated from the Seventh-day Adventist high school, and I did not go to the Adventist colleges like everybody was trying to shove me into. And if I had gone that route, um, the permissible careers for girls were like healthcare, like you could be a nurse or a physical therapist, teachers, of course. Um, so I guess I probably would have become a teacher maybe because I loved school. Um, and you definitely again they have this kind of double standard where they think they're so emancipated, so they don't shove their women into marriage immediately like the Mormons. Like at 18 you aren't pressured to get married, but their purity culture is so extreme and women are responsible for it. So, we were supposed to be the ones who put the brakes on any physical involvement with a boyfriend or whatever. And you definitely were not allowed to have premarital sex. So people do get married young because that's that's their only way to get to have sex. So I'm sure I would have gotten married at 18, 19, 20, maybe. Possibly would have waited till after college. And then if you're a conservative Adventist, which is the way I was raised, you kind of gravitate toward um, there are these centers. So again, not compounds, but there are towns around the United States that are almost exclusively Adventist. So that's where I went to high school, was a place called Berrien Springs, Michigan. And that's where their seminary is. And so they have multiple schools and a university and everything that's grown up around it. And I don't know how many thousand people live in Berrien Springs, but it's a lot. And they're all Adventist. Everybody from the person in the grocery store, which of course is an Adventist grocery store, to the post office guy, to everything. Everybody's Adventist. And there's another one in California like that, Loma Linda. And I'm sure I would have married a good Adventist doctor, just like every woman in my family did, and lived in one of those areas where everybody was Adventist and raised a bunch of little Adventist kids, I guess. It's funny, no one's ever asked me to imagine what I would be like if I had stayed in the system. I mean, honestly, probably I would not be alive. I think I would not have been able to hack it. It would have it would have killed me. Because I never, that was kind of the problem, was I never actually believed it. So it was, if I had been forced to stay in it, it would have just, I don't know, been awful.
No, it's scary because there are people who don't believe, and I know, like in the call that I was in, there are people who are like
Mhm.
they're not happy, but they stay because they can't imagine a life outside.
Yes. Yes.
You can't.
And I've heard that there's a big ex-Adventist Reddit community. It's almost like 10,000 people, I think, in the Reddit community. And there are so many, we see coming in there a lot of young kids that are 17, 18, 19, and saying exactly that. Like, I don't believe it, but either I still have to live with my parents, they're paying for my education or whatever, so I have to stay in, or else they're in their mid 20s or something and they're just like, I don't believe it and I want to get out, but I don't have any friends. I've never had contact with the outside. I don't know how to socialize. I was homeschooled or whatever, and I have no skills. I'm terrified. I can't leave. And it just breaks my heart. It just, wow. And then people who did marry super young and they want to get out, but their spouse doesn't, and they're trapped. And oh my goodness.
It, it,
Oh my
it,
goodness.
it gets messy.
It gets messy.
Like people who see the documentaries and are not familiar with someone who was actually in a cult, they may not see what happens behind the scenes. It gets very
Right.
messy.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And just the psychological, they can't understand all the ways that you are trapped. I think people who've never been through it don't understand that at all.
And so going back to the purity culture, did you feel
Mhm.
trapped? Did you feel guilty, shame, all of the above?
All of the above to an extent. It's a big part of my memoir, Holy Disobedience. I think that when you're in such a controlled environment, you kind of focus on the things that make the least sense to you, and none of it made any sense. But what I sort of came to as an older high school kid, like 16-ish probably was when I started to realize. And I had been totally a goody two shoes, like totally a goody two shoes. I was getting my A pluses and I was not dating and I was not, I was just like on the track, even though I didn't really believe it. But I knew that if I was a goody two shoes, everybody would leave me alone. Like I wouldn't have to have special prayer sessions and blah, blah, blah over me. So I just towed the line, towed the line. I was a superstar. And but around 16 or so, I all of a sudden really realized that all the adults around us were terrified. They were just terrified that we were going to find out something. And I couldn't figure out what it was. Like, why are they so scared that they have to keep such tight control on us? Like, what are they preventing us from knowing and seeing? And I think any questioning teenager would have felt that same thing, but maybe they would have come to different conclusions. Some kids probably would have come to a theological thing or something of like, they just don't want me to find out that the Bible's full of shit or, whatever. For me, I came to, oh my God, they're scared we're going to have sex. They are terrified we're going to find out what sex is all about. And so from that moment on, I was just like, I'm going. I'm going for sex. And so I did. I went down to the local high school that was not Adventist, and I just picked a guy off the basketball team, and I was like, he's adorable. I'm gonna have sex with him. And so I did. And after that, it just really everything that the adults were so trying to control for us, just all of it fell in shambles. I was just like, I'm not buying into any of this. I'm so out of this. Um, and then later in my deconstruction, many decades literally after that, I started to put together the pieces that not only is the Adventist Church an end times cult, but they really were founded on this great fear of sex. Um, John Harvey Kellogg was one of the founding members of the Adventist Church, and I don't know if you know anything about him, but he invented cornflakes to kill lust. That he'd never had sex in his life. He was married, but he thought sex was horrible. He thought masturbation was horrible. So he had this whole sanitarium, this whole hospital built in Michigan, where basically he was trying to cure people of some regular medical maladies, but basically sex. Like he thought it was a horrible thing. And then Ellen White, the Adventist prophet, she wrote extensively about preventing children from masturbating. And so anyway, it just like the church was really founded on one of its pillars was this great, huge fear of sex. And that has continued through the church largely. They had one of their medical school professors for decades wrote a book that we used as our purity culture manual, which recommended female genital mutilation, like just chopping off body parts to prevent masturbation and sex. And they are very anti-LGBTQ right now. They have this huge lawsuit in Maryland, I think, where they are literally suing for the right to fire people who are gay. And they were one of the big funding sources of conversion therapy. And they used conversion therapy a lot in a lot of their schools and their seminars and things. So fear of sex has been a through line of that church and continues to this day. And so when I put that all together and the whole purity culture experience that I had been through, it was just like, I'm throwing the baby and the bathwater as far the fuck away as I can throw it. Like, you people are awful and horrible, and you're all about control. Like, that was where I just realized, like, it's all about control. And I just happened to act it out. Like, sex was the hatch that I was able to lift, that could go free.
It was like the Pandora's box and everything just
Right,
came out.
exactly. Exactly. And there are still things popping out every once in a while. Right?
Oh.
Mm.
I've spoken with a few other people from different cults, different backgrounds, and I have encountered a couple, I mean, not a couple, but I mean, a couple people who have shared that because of their culty upbringing and the shame with sexuality, shame of
Mhm.
the body, that they remembered they're like married couples that they get married, but they need to speak first with the elder because the elder has to tell them what to do because they've been so sheltered and there's just not just don't know what the hell to do.
Yep,
I know you didn't get married in the church,
right.
but would that have happened if you did? Would there be someone to talk to you?
Yes, if you are an Adventist couple, I remember, oh, that's funny. This is bringing back something I haven't thought of in literally dozens of years. They have, oh God, what is it called? It's not marriage and family. We had to take a marriage and family class in high school. All Adventist high schools, I think, teach something similar. And it was not sex education at all. It was basically teaching us more purity culture and all of that crap. But then there is one, I think it's anyway, the name of it doesn't matter. But if you are both Adventist and you are going to get married in an Adventist church, you have to take this course on marriage from a pastor or a leader of some sort. And sometimes there are even retreats, I think, or something for 3 days, and all these engaged couples go. And I don't know, because of course I never went. I don't know how much of that is actual like sex education for them, or how much it's like, oh, the man is the head of the family and the source of God's power, and the wife should submit. I don't know. It's probably a lot of that. Um, and then pastors, of course, are supposed to be who you go to for counseling if you're having sexual problems in your marriage. But I don't know. Again, I don't know how much practical information is ever passed along. I do certainly know how a lot of people who said that, and this is something that it never even occurred to me until I started speaking out on Instagram and TikTok, and then people would flood my DMs. Um, how many people who experienced purity culture and went into a young marriage never consummated it because they either couldn't figure out how it was supposed to work, or that just the shame was so intense that they just, even though they were married and it was okay now, They couldn't just flip a switch and be like, oh, cool, sex is great now, because it had always been so shamed and so dirty and so bad. And you can't just erase that immediately out of your brain.
And
It's illogical.
was the shame, was it equal for male and female, or was there more shame directed towards the women?
You know, I there was more responsibility for the shame directed at women. It was our shoulders that might lead someone to stray, or it was, and there was this whole narrative, this whole trope. And of course, I'm old, so maybe that's changed. But certainly when I was growing up in the 80s, there was this whole trite, like men have huge sex drives and women have none. So women are responsible for keeping the sex chaste and pure. And So we certainly bore a lot of the shame if something happened. It was the woman who had allowed it to happen because men, they just can't help their drives. Um, and female bodies had to be covered up because they were tempting. But as far as like the internalized personal shame, I've heard from men that it was equally damaging, just the whole sex is bad simple thing message that got through to all of us is it's just bad and wrong, and lust is bad and wrong. And even again, even once you were in that sanctified relationship, it was just overwhelming for a lot of, I think, men as well as women.
And when did you know that you weren't buying it? Because you said that you went to the basketball court, you saw a guy, he looked adorable.
Yep.
You saw, you came, and you conquered.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but was it how? When was it that you realized that you weren't buying this? And because I ask, because sometimes with the cults and with all the pressure, there is a fear of doing anything, not only sexual activity, but anything that is like disobedient, because hell and all bad stuff is going to fall upon you. But you went and you,
Yeah.
no fear. Or did you
No,
have fear?
I didn't. I didn't. For some reason, the sexual shame chip just never stuck in me. And I'm not sure why, because I certainly internalized that horrible shame in other ways that I still am deprogramming myself in terms of how I'm afraid to be bad, do transgressive things in just like a secular environment where it doesn't matter, like if I park in the wrong space or something, I'm all like freaked out and nervous and everything because I'm doing something bad and I just can't handle it. And, I can spiral really quickly and those kinds of things. But for some reason, the sex thing, I just realized that it was fine. It didn't matter. It was just these arbitrary rules where they were literally trying to control us. And there were so many rules like that about Adventism, like meat. Yeah, I never really believed that eating meat was bad. I never believed that drinking coffee was bad or alcohol. I mean, now there's the health part of those things, but uh I just didn't buy into the moral component, I guess, of any of it. Um, it all, and so you were asking, when did I learn that? And I'm not sure I ever didn't know that,
Mm,
some of my earliest memories were, and of course we all, when we're raised, you were raised in your cult, right?
no.
Oh, okay. Ooh, that's a story. But I think when you're raised in a cult, where your family dynamics and the cult dynamics go is kind of like you try to understand where exactly those um differentiated themselves. So I'm not sure how much of the control stuff I realized was family and how much was the church, but it was all the same, basically.
And you mentioned that it is an end times cult. Would you care to elaborate?
Sure. So the birth of the Adventist Church was in William Miller, he predicted 1844, I think. Um, that Jesus was coming back. And all these cults sprang up around it, the Mormons and the Adventists, the JWs, everything. And I'm loosely, I mean, please, people, commenters, don't come at me. I know I'm just paraphrasing here. It's not all exact. But basically, these cults sprang up from the Millerite movement. And it was all end times. It was Jesus was coming back. Everybody get ready. People were selling their farms and getting ready. And then it didn't happen. And so a lot of the cults that sprang up at that time died, but Adventism, Mormons, et cetera, went on, partly because they had these really strong prophets. But ever since then, it hasn't really changed. Every successive generation of Adventists believes Jesus is coming back in their lifetime. And Ellen White, their prophet, that was her big thing. She wrote all these books and stories about how, so they believe Daniel and Revelation, like all that stuff, the mark of the beast and the, blah, blah, blah. And she believed that a couple times she predicted that when Jesus was coming back in her lifetime then, and it didn't happen. And so she would revise and be like, oh no, that just means he's entering the sanctuary, the chamber of the Most High, and he's reviewing the records, and she would keep like making all these changes. But everybody still believes that that end times is coming any moment. A lot of them now are very MAGA, very Christian nationalists for better, because they think, and they're very anti environmentalist, because anything that hastens the end of times, whether it's political bullshit or like global warming, it's proof that we're right. The end times is coming. So they famously, of course, birthed David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. Those were two Adventist things that eventually converged, and just took the end times thing just a little bit further than the standard Adventists. But so there are also these other kind of corollary things that Adventists believe. Ellen White said that the Catholics bear the mark of the beast, 666, and the Catholics are going to band together with world governments and make a Sunday law, and everybody's going to have to worship on Sunday, and the Adventists are going to be persecuted for that, of course, because persecution fetish runs in end times cults, and they're going to be persecuted, and they're all going to have to run and live in the hills, and everybody. So we had drills when we were kids that we were going to be dragged out and held at gunpoint and made to swear that we would worship on Sunday. And, we had to stand up for our Saturday beliefs or we would get shot in the head. And, it's pretty traumatizing as a 10-year-old. But, and then, yeah, Sunday law, Catholics. So it's all just one big weirdo pileup of end times idiocy, really.
Well, I'm stealing that term you used, persecution fetish. I haven't
Oh
heard
my
it, but
gosh.
it's true.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. And I mean, Christians in general have that. We're not allowed to express our Christianity, blah, blah, blah. But the end times cults really, really do it. They are just, oh, they just love it. My comment sections on social media are just full of people like, you hate us. Where's your hatred? Why are you hating? And I'm like, it's facts, bud. It's facts. I'm not hating you. You just have a persecution fetish. Ridiculous.
Now, so you said that you did drills at the age of 10. What were those drills like?
So the Adventists I was not allowed to participate in this group for a lot of reasons, but they have a Boy Scout, Girl Scout hybrid thing called the Pathfinders, and it's a very military-esque little kid group, and you can join it at, I don't know, second grade, third grade, and it goes all the way up to high school. They have military style uniforms. You earn badges that go on your sash, like very military. You do marching, and that famous Christian song, like we're all
Marching saints,
marching in the
something
Lord's
marching.
army. There you go. Um, and then yeah, they would actually take you out I mean, various Pathfinder groups ran it different ways. So I've heard everything from the ones that I was around, because my dad was a Pathfinder leader at one point when I was too tiny to join. And those were mostly just like camping and learning some survival skills type of thing. But other Pathfinder groups, a lot of them literally will drop kids out with no food, no water, build a shelter. You're going to be persecuted. Learn to live out here by yourselves. They have them eat bugs. They force them to eat bugs. They just all kinds of crazy, crazy stuff. And then, yeah, and then you have these drills, which ours happened at school, but Pathfinders did it. A lot of Adventist boarding schools do it, where some of them don't even tell you that it's a drill. They act like it's real and they terrorize kids. Thank God our principal was a little wiser than that. But where it's like basically SWAT teams storm in and drag you out at gunpoint, and they force you on your knees, and they make you swear that you're going to worship on Sunday. And everybody has to go through this whole thing of how will they die for their faith. And like I said, some of them do that and don't tell the kids that it's fake, and these kids are literally shitting themselves. And so there's a broad spectrum of that. And I've heard that it's gotten less. I think that kind of was a big thing in the 80s, maybe more than, but certainly kids I know that went to Adventist boarding schools, even into the 2000s, were being subjected to it for sure.
As you're explaining all this, my question that I have internally is why? Like, why do this? Why? I mean, they'll say, even in the call that I was in, we had some really bonkers exercises, and they would say, well, the founder, the leader wants us to do this. Well, okay, well, eliminate that thought. Use your fucking mind. If
Right.
God gave you a brain, now fucking use it.
Right.
Why? Are you doing it because of him, or does it make you feel good? Do you get a pleasure? Does it give you some kind of a kick? Like, why?
Yeah.
It's just so
Yeah.
sick.
It is. It's really sick. I mean, it is so abusive. I just long-lasting trauma, right? PTSD. I mean, I don't know. You're so right though. Why? Like, what is the basic? I mean, they would say that they're training you because this could happen any moment. That's the other thing that they kind of do to throw you off guard, is like they literally, as a kid, you think that maybe tomorrow you'll wake up and Sunday law will have happened. And of course, as a kid, you don't know that, like, this requires governments and all kinds of things, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. But they tell kids this, and it's terrorizing.
And it justifies being an asshole. In the end,
Yes.
it's
Yes,
justification of
exactly.
being a jerk.
Yep. Yep.
But I feel like my blood pressure is going up a little bit, and
Exactly.
rightfully so.
Yes.
But something I like to do in this podcast is also focus on the healing, on the growth, on the resilience. And something
Mhm.
we've seen you do is not only leave, but you told me that it's taken, time. Even up to now, there is still a bit of that deprogramming, perhaps we can say. But
Yeah.
you're doing a big, huge milestone, and that is writing your memoir. Can you tell us, how did this begin, where you got the idea and the courage to say, I'm gonna share my story?
It's been a really a multi-decade effort. It's funny, I've always been a writer. I write magazine articles, essays, etc. I've always done that. I was an English major in college, and I always thought I never had any stories to tell. Like, I always assumed I was just an analytical writer. Like, I would write about other things, but never I didn't personally have anything. And I've actively hid for the first 10, 15 years of my adulthood that I'd ever been part of this crazy whatever. Like, I did not tell anybody about my fucking crazy childhood. I tried to be as normal as possible. And then what really kicked it off was in my mid 30s. I discovered that a really adored family member of mine, whom I personally adored, my whole family adored, but also the larger church adored, had been a serial child predator as he worked for the church. And the church had just moved him along several times, and he just repeat offended, like they always do. And the church kept covering up for him and allowing him other opportunities. And so that really knocked me just knocked me. Like I was so unmoored in my life, even though I'd been out of the church at that point for 15, 18 years. Um, and I really realized that everything that I had been raised with was a big fat lie. It wasn't just ridiculous, which is kind of the way I had viewed it up until then. And I was just like, it was all a big fat lie. And that church is possibly absolutely evil. And I'd never thought of it that way. I found one of the victims of my family member, and she and I became very good friends. And she was incredibly instrumental. I started writing at that point. I was like, I'm going to write about this. But I thought it was a story that I was going to kind of process about the church. It was out there. It wasn't in here. It was the church and how it had covered up my family members' bad actions and her story. And I started writing, and my relationship with my family kept getting in there and all this stuff. And eventually she, in my book, I call her Dr. Z, and she kept kind of dropping hints of like, you have not processed what went on in your family and your childhood. And you have not processed who this church really is. And I was raising young kids at the time, and I really didn't want to go there. And I just shut it all down. And I didn't write again for about 10 years. And then within the past 5 something years, I entered my half-written memoir manuscript on a complete lark. It was I think COVID, and I just saw a writing contest, and it was for unfinished manuscripts, and I was like, oh, I have one of those, and I dusted it off and I sent it in, and I won. And so then I was like, well, shit. Along with winning came an agent. And what was I going to do at that point? Be like, but I really don't want to write this. So I was like, okay, well, I guess now I'm going to write this book. So, so I started all over again. I reacquainted myself with Dr. Z, and I was like, you're right, basically. I never did process anything. I didn't actually deconstruct. I just left screaming. And so then I went, so the past 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever it's been years, I have been deconstructing so consciously and writing the memoir, and realized that the story, obviously, obvious to everyone but me for a long time, the story was not about the church out there. And even though that all is pulled in, but it wasn't about my family member and Dr. Z and everything. It was about how I had been raised, how they had both been raised, how we'd all been raised in this fucking cult, and the damage that it did to all of us. And for me, I acted out a lot of that damage in my secular life for 30 years, from 20 to 50, basically, before I realized that I had taken so much of that programming, like we were talking about the shame and everything, or the being so terrified of doing anything bad. And I had just kind of pasted all of that programming over secular interactions, behaviors, relationships, etc. But the roots of it were in that freaking cult and in its control. And so it's been a long, long process. And there you have it.
Wow. Well, it's been a long process. It didn't take overnight. And, even for myself, when I left, look for, I didn't look to acknowledge the things that happened. It took time.
Right.
But for you, since you've been on this journey much longer than I have,
Yeah.
what, if anything, changed once you started to acknowledge and process all that has happened in your life?
I would have to say the biggest change, which I still have to work on every single day, and I think I will still have to work on it until the day I die, is believing that I am the authority in my own life. And I'm in my mid 50s, and that is a really pathetic thing to still struggle with. It's really sad, but I have so habitually taken any authority as over me because that's the way I was raised. And so learning boundaries, learning what they are even and how to set them, um, that I deserve to listen to my gut and obey uh and that I have authority in my own freaking life. And I still struggle with it massively. And I think that has been the most freeing, the most wonderful, the best, the biggest growth. But it's also going to be my biggest struggle for forever.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Again, the name of your memoir, Holy Disobedience, when does it come
Yeah.
out?
March 31st
March
with
30th.
Lake Drive Books.
Excellent. Will it be available only at the a website or everywhere?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So pre-orders actually open. I don't know when this episode will be released, but pre-orders are opening the very end of January or early February, I believe. And it will be sold everywhere that books are sold. So you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. My favorite place to order is Powell's Books, of course, because I don't like Amazon, but um and there will be an electronic and a print version and an audio version, which I start reading next week. So um, it will be, but you can, and of course, you can always go to Lake Drive Books. In fact, you can go there right now if you're watching and you want to make sure you don't miss it. Lake Drive Books, my publisher, has a Holy Disobedience page, and you can go there and just enter your email for notification when orders open. And then that way you won't miss it.
And before we wrap this up,
Mhm.
one more question on your memoir. How did you come up with the name?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so for those who have seen me anywhere on social media, you know that my social media handle is the Glory Hole, WHOLE. Got to get that W in there. I named my memoir that originally because I love plays on words. And if you know what a glory hole is, or if you don't, go look it up. I'm not going to talk about it here. But I thought it was a hilarious play on words, and I wanted my memoir to be named that. And for me, Glory Hole with the W was my take on Christianity. And, for again, if you don't know what a glory hole is, go look it up. But it's basically you're extending a very, very private, very unprotected, uh, vulnerable part of yourself out into this void that you can't see or know. And you have to trust, you have to believe that there is something beyond you that is going to basically show you the stars and let you see heaven. Um, or or you could be disfigured and maimed and scarred for life. And you don't know what's on the other side of that unknown that you're extending this little part of yourself to. So that was my analogy for Christianity, and I thought I was hilarious. But my publisher very wisely said, it's not a good title for your memoir because it doesn't have anything to do with your material, funny as it is. And you want people to be able to go to a bookstore and they ask for a title that actually makes sense to them. And or if they can't remember it, they're like, oh, but it was about something like, and so because I was such a disobedient Adventist, basically, and there is something very holy about rebelling against control. So we came up with Holy Disobedience, and it stuck. And the tagline is Sex, Sin, and Secrets in the Biggest Church No One Knows.
Wow. So, audience, go and get a copy or wait for your copy, but soon, of course, everyone get a copy of Holy Disobedience. And I always ask each guest, and the question that I'm going to ask is, Melissa, what is your truth that heals?
My truth that heals is that leaving does not equal healing. So if you've left, whether it's a relationship or a cult or anything, just the act of leaving and putting it in your rearview mirror does not mean you are magically cured and done. So do the work. I hate that phrase, but you have to do the work to actually heal and protect yourself, to grow, to become your better version of yourself without whatever that is that you're tossing over your shoulder.
Well, thank you so much. And to the audience, please go ahead and subscribe to this podcast, The Truth That Heals. Please share this episode so that more people can hear the story of our guest today, Melissa Duge Spiers. And also, if you would like to help me, you can do so by buying me a coffee. All the time you buy me coffee, that helps me to keep this channel going. And you may do so by going to buymeacoffee.com/truth.h7. And again, to Melissa, is there a place where people can follow you?
Oh, yes. So you can follow me on TikTok and Instagram as The Glory Hole. Just don't forget the W. And then I have a writer Instagram, which is just Melissa Duge Spiers Writer. And I have a Substack, Melissa Duge Spiers.
Thank you so much. And to the audience, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode on the Truth That Heals podcast.